Hello and welcome to the Early Career Researcher podcast, your regular discussion on all things relating to the life and work of early career researchers working in the humanities. I'm Charlie, and today I'm joined by one very special guest for this podcast. It's Rosie Bonté. Hello, Rosie.
Hello.
Hello, welcome to the show, Rosie. Your first time, hopefully the first time of many.
Well, very happy to be here, so thank you for inviting me.
That's okay. We'll introduce Rosie properly in a minute, as we always do with our special guests. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of things, all relating basically to the world of publishing, because that's where Rosie's area of specialism is, and she comes to us from the publishing world, but also from the academic world and the early career researcher world. So Rosie got lots to tell us about those kinds of topics. We're going to spend some time talking about careers in publishing, about career routes in kind of, I don't want to say like, is the word alt-ac too cliched?
Cliched but accurate.
Yeah. So alternative academic careers and parallel academic careers, whatever. And then we're going to spend some time at the end of today's podcast talking about publishing and giving some little bits of advice for people who are publishing for the first time or who are early on in their publishing careers. So today's episode, we're calling it The World of Publishing, if that's okay with you. It sounds
that
awful,
sounds
doesn't it?
terribly dramatic,
Yeah.
but let's hope that we can live up to expectations here.
And we are on episode 13, so no pressure. No pressure.
What can possibly go wrong?
As ever, you can leave reviews or comments on our Spotify feed. You can follow us on Twitter X using the tag @ECR Podcasters, and on Blue Sky, where we're also called @ECR Podcasters. And you can email us ecrpodcasters@gmail.com, and we'd love it if you, our listeners, have ideas for topics that you'd like us to talk about in future episodes. So those are the preliminaries. Let's get on to grill Rosie about everything to do with publishing. Firstly, Rosie, let's do what we always do with everybody. Tell us a bit about what you do now and how you got there. So let's start with what you do now, and then we'll ask you some questions about how you got there. So what's your job, Rosie?
Okay,
Tell us.
Yes, so I work for Brepols Publishers, who are an academic press. We're a small family-owned firm based in Belgium, in Turnhout in Belgium, and we specialise in the humanities. So we basically publish peer-reviewed books covering everything from archaeology, history, art history, critical editions of Latin and Greek texts, vernacular studies, and we cover pretty much everything from the Paleolithic up until 20th century history these days. Wow. Special.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Mostly historical themes that you're publishing in that press then.
Yeah, very much so. So we're very much a humanities publisher. We certainly don't cover anything, sort of STEM related. But I think that's really important because most of the people who work there, including myself, and obviously we'll come back to that, have a background in the humanities, and we really want to specialise here. And I think we can give a good home to people working in the humanities. We are only a small press, as I say, but it means we're set up to handle all things within the field, and we have a really good knowledge and background in the field, so we can cover a wide range of disciplines.
So if I said, what's your job title and what do you actually do? Do you love that question? What do you do all day? I like to think that I just stare into space all day and think clever things. What do you do all day?
Well, some days it feels like I mostly just answer emails, but no. My job is quite broad, actually. I think Brepols is a bit different to a lot of academic publishing firms, because whereas a lot of firms tend to have one person who's in charge of acquisitions and then one person who's in charge of production, at Brepols we like to cover all aspects.
Okay.
So, and I think that's quite nice because it means if you come to Brepols, you're working with one person from the moment you pitch an idea at a conference, for example, right through to the moment the book's gone to printer. So I do a bit of everything. It means I'm going to conferences, I chat to people, I hear about really amazing research all day, which is super exciting. I encourage people to obviously send in book proposals to us, and I'll often work with people on helping them to shape up a proposal. I work with the editorial boards that we have. I set up peer reviews. And then obviously I do all of the production side of things. So I'm taking care of copy editing, typesetting and so on. I'm not necessarily doing these jobs myself, but I'm overseeing everything. I've probably checked a book 7 or 8 times by the time it goes to print. So it's very hands-on, and it means that I'm sort of involved in every stage from cover design through to sorting out how many review copies we're sending out at the very end.
Because I've, for those listening who've never published books, certainly my experience is that you talk to an acquisitions editor, and then once the book is kind of delivered, so you might get a contract with that acquisitions editor, then you write it, and then you deal with someone else when it goes through the kind of editing stage, and then you get passed on to someone else again when it goes into production and copy editing. So you're a jack of all trades, right?
Yes, I mean, obviously we're working with other people, but I'm sort of the person in charge, and therefore I'm overseeing everything. But it also means I know exactly what the book's supposed to be about. And so I'm trying to help you sort of see your vision through from beginning to end. And because we've been involved in the discussion from day one, I can sort of work with you to make that happen. And there's nothing that's going to get lost in communication between different people.
I think it's worth mentioning, we had a funny incident just now, didn't we? Because Rosie's come to Norwich, where I'm based, and when we were checking into a hotel, you had a book thrown at you, didn't you, by someone who works there?
Which was absolutely fabulous, because I signed in and they said, "Where do you work?" And I said, "Brepols Publishers." And he said, "I don't suppose you're interested in looking at PhD theses that have been turned into monographs?" And I said, "Well, yes. What's it on?" And he was explaining, "Well, it's about sort of Roman culture in northwestern Europe." And I said, "Well, absolutely." So I've fished out a business card, handed it on, and we'll see what happens.
That could be the best money your publisher has ever spent on that, I reckon.
It could be really exciting.
So he was just someone who's finished a PhD and now he's working in a hotel, and he was like, "Have my book, it's great."
I think that's absolutely fabulous. I was clearly meant to stay at that hotel.
You were.
So no, I'm really excited to hear hear a bit more detail about the book, because we didn't really have time to chat to him as much as I'd have liked. But he's got my card, so hopefully an email very soon.
He knows what room you're in, so maybe he'll knock on your door later and say, "Tell me more."
That's not terrifying at all.
So that's a bit about what you do now. Lots of travelling around, lots of conferences, lots of talking to authors, lots of being enthusiastic about new ideas, right? And I know this because Rosie and I are doing a book together at some point. So
we are.
It's true. How did you get there? So for our listeners, maybe like part of the point of this podcast is to tell them, like, these are some career options that you might want to pursue, and like these are some things that you could do with your academic career that aren't necessarily be an academic in the like pure sense that some people do. Tell us a bit about how you got there, Rosie. So like what were your career stages, and how did you end up doing the job?
Okay, so I started off, I did my undergraduate degree in the Department of Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic in Cambridge, which is quite a niche degree, but something I very much enjoyed. And I stayed on and did the MPhil degree. And I have to be honest and say I did not enjoy the MPhil degree.
I hated my master's as well. So okay.
It felt like I was just jumping through 1,000 different hoops and box ticking, and I didn't get a lot of joy out of it. So at the end of my MPhil, I actually went and worked for 2 years. I went to the Netherlands and I worked for a corporate communications firm, which I have to say I also hated. Within 6 months, I was Googling PhD positions back in the UK. But it was very good for my writing, I have to say, because I was working on writing corporate copy, all sorts of different things. And it was often very short deadlines, turning things around. It made me a much better writer. So if nothing else, I took from that short interlude a taste that that actually academia had quite a lot to recommend it. Yeah. The real world was quite frightening. And also, as I say, it made me a lot less of a perfectionist, which I think I had been as an undergraduate. I'd overthought everything in terms of my writing. I went back to Cambridge to do the PhD. And I spent the second year of my PhD actually as a visiting scholar at the Centre for Medieval Studies in Norway at the University of Bergen.
Cool. Yeah.
And that was, it was brilliant and a really good opportunity. But I was also in Norway on my UK student stipend.
Yeah. Norway's quite expensive.
Norway's quite
right?
expensive.
Yeah, I've been
Norway
there.
is really
It's like
expensive.
£10 for a beer, right? And only like a 500.
Well,
yeah.
this was the thing. It was so
Not
phenomenally
that everything's
expensive.
measured in beer, but
And so I just got married at this point, and my husband was also writing up his PhD, and his funding had just run out. So there were two of us living in Norway on my UK student stipend, and we were basically living on pasta. And while I was in Norway, the Centre for Medieval Studies came to me and said, "Are you interested in doing some freelance work? Can you do some editing of academic English, basically polishing up the English?"
For that university in Bergen in Norway.
Exactly.
Cool, yeah.
And A, it paid very well, but B, I found I actually really enjoyed the work. I took an awful lot of pleasure in taking something that was already very good, but being able to polish it up and work with the author and take it from good to absolutely brilliant scholarship. Because there were some fantastic ideas there that just needed to be better expressed. And I found I really enjoyed editing work and actually working with people to help them express their ideas in the best possible way.
Yeah. If this was a job interview, you'd be doing really well, by the way.
Fantastic.
I'd give you the job.
So partly because of this, I started thinking, I'm not sure what I want to do after the PhD. But I did think, academic publishing could be an option. And then more generally during my PhD, I did contact some other publishers, and I did do some freelance sort of copy editing work for a couple of different publishers, one of whom was actually Brepols.
Yeah.
Then my third year of my PhD, I actually took a break and was on maternity leave for a year. And then I came back and finished off the PhD. But I was coming towards the end of my PhD, and I was really not sure what to do. And I sort of already decided I didn't want to start looking for postdocs because I had a family by this point and I wanted some stability. I didn't want... My husband was also in academia. I mean, he's actually left academia as well now, but at that point he was a postdoc, and I thought, well, I want a bit of stability. I have to note that financially we're not going to end up living in a cardboard box outside Sainsbury's. And I was very lucky because the Brepols job was advertised in June of the year I was writing up. And at the interview they said to me, well, when do you think you can finish by? And I said September. And they said, okay. And I got the job, which was brilliant. And it meant I really had to finish. I've never written so fast in my life. So I was literally submit, start work.
Yeah.
But I was just very lucky that that's how it came about. And I think all the things that I had done up to that point, the copy editing, the copywriting that I'd done in the Netherlands, where I'd been working on corporate texts and editing corporate texts, plus the editing work I'd done when I was in Bergen, these were all really good things that helped shape my career, but also that helped strengthen my CV.
Yeah. And we had an episode a while back, listeners, you can go back and find it, where we talked to a careers advisor called Rich on alternative career paths outside of academia. And the big thing that Rich said several times was think about what you've done in terms of the skills that it's given you and the experiences that it's given you. Even if you think, I've only ever done academic stuff, think about what skills that academic stuff gives you. Like for you, academic writing, academic editing, working to deadlines. Rachael, who's one of our regular contributors, always talks about project management as the biggest skill.
These are all your soft skills, if you will. They're skills that can be transferred from one job to another. And I think when you're working on your CV, it's just a case of showing how these skills can be transferred and really showing I can work to deadlines. I can do research, which means I can essentially take a huge mass of ideas and boil it down into a strong, coherent argument in an efficient and sensible way.
In theory, hopefully.
In theory. But these are skills that actually are really useful in any position. That ability to draw on a range of different viewpoints, different forms of evidence, and boil them down into a coherent argument.
Yeah.
In
theory,
these are useful. These are useful skills.
If only our politicians did the same thing. We'll talk about that, mate. Don't talk about that. Politics is on our mind in the UK for obvious reasons at the moment, but we'll move on from that. So about your job, what are the best things about your job, Rosie, that you really love about your job?
Oh, for me, although it's a lot of travelling at the moment, we are conference season, so I am moving around and living out of a suitcase, but I get such a tremendous amount of energy out of conferences. I love going to conferences and talking to people and hearing about amazing research. I mean, when I did my studies, I specialised in Viking Age Scandinavia. And as far as I was concerned, the world basically ended in 1262-64 because Iceland became a part of the Norwegian kingdom and that was the end. Now I get to cover all sorts of things. I do a series on Nubia and I was looking at pictures of rock art giraffes the other day and I can't describe how happy the rock art giraffes made me. But, you know, I get to hear about so much fantastic material. You know, like one day I'm talking about Mesopotamian pottery and the next day we're looking at Roman tablets from Hadrian's Wall, or we're looking at, you know, French literature from the 17th century or women's rights movements in the 19th century. And it's just brilliant because I think people are so passionate about their research, and listening to people talking about their research and then working with them to say, well, okay, how can we make this research happen? How can we get it out there in a way that other people are going to understand how great this stuff is? You know, that gives me a huge amount of joy.
Tell me, just like for a rough guide, where have you been recently, and like what have those things been on? So like if one wanted to understand your world, I know you've travelled a bit. So in the last month, tell me the places you've been to.
Oh, gosh. Well, this month's been a bit mad by anybody's standards. So I've been to Paris for the Classical Archaeology Conference. Then I headed off to Turnhout in Belgium, which is where our head office is. Then I've just been in Edinburgh at the Society for the Medieval Mediterranean. We've got the International Medieval Congress in Leeds next week. And then later on this summer, I'll be at the European Association of Archaeologists in Rome.
Wow.
So
lots of travel.
There is a lot of travel. It goes through phases. I think June is definitely a sort of living out of a suitcase sort of a month, but then hopefully it'll settle down again in September, which is quite nice because obviously I have kids and they quite like to see me sometimes as well.
So I feel like in academic kind of circles, listeners will probably be aware of this from your own experiences, but we tend to kind of conference in the university holiday seasons, don't we?
Very much so.
Sometimes over the Easter, sometimes over Christmas, and then summer, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there are just sort of peak periods, and a lot of the conferences are every year, so I can sort of work to them. And actually, it's quite helpful as well, because in terms of deadlines for books, when I'm working with authors, we sort of tend to push for the big conferences. Okay, let's get this book out in time for this conference, and that's quite a nice way of doing it as well.
So if one were to say to you, what's hard about your job, probably you'd also say travel, right? So it's like a good and a bad thing, right?
Travel would be one element. Sometimes just meeting people's expectations is hard. And I think academics never sleep. You know, it's... I mean, I shouldn't moan, but I had to take 2 weeks off in early January because I got pneumonia, of all things.
Oh, wow.
I got back after 2 weeks off and I had 750 unread emails.
Oh my goodness, I'm sorry.
Which was quite epic, but it's, you know, it's fine because most people are sort of very understanding, you know, that I had to take time off. But I think people have very tight deadlines in academic jobs, and also academics don't necessarily have the healthiest work-life balance.
Some don't. We try and encourage that on this podcast, but we're all guilty of it, definitely.
I think that does sort of then leach into how academics will then interact with, say, their publishers, because, of course, they will email you at sort of 10 p.m. on a Saturday. And because I don't have a healthy work-life balance, I do find myself checking my emails, which is really bad. No, I think the things that are probably harder are sometimes when you know that you've got a really exciting project on, but it's always a case of I also have to balance the books as well. We have to, the way that Brepols works, it tends to be that we cover all the costs of publishing ourselves, so copy editing, typesetting, so on and so forth. And then, of course, we rely on book sales to cover those costs. And it's always that balancing act between wanting to make the best book possible. And yes, it would be lovely if it were, you know, full colour throughout and
the stuff that gives you nightmares.
Yeah, but
27
also
pictures in colour.
sometimes with archaeology it might be 270 images in colour, but it's, but then it's just balancing it against having a product that people can afford to buy and making sure that the book's balance and that everybody's happy and that it comes out on time, but that we don't cut any corners because people want everything out for yesterday, but we don't want to compromise the quality. So we've still got to make sure we've really spent the time on copy editing and typesetting.
That's
there's just lots of different pressures from different sides.
So is it difficult sometimes where you might have a situation? So put yourself in the situation where you've got a really interesting idea for a book that you quite like to publish, but actually it's not going to make much money. So do you ever have to make a really difficult choice there about making profit versus the topics that you're interested in?
I think Brepols is quite unique in that because we're a small publisher and any profit we do make gets ploughed back into the company anyway, automatically. It's not like we've got any shareholders who are expecting a large payout or anything. We're not a vast profit-making machine. So I don't think that's such an issue. Occasionally we do have books where, maybe it's too niche or it's problematic for one reason or another. But in that case, we'll always sort of work with the author and see if we can come up with a solution, if we can find a way of reframing the book. Yeah. I don't think we expect any of our books to be bestsellers in the sense that, we're never going to be on the top 10 the bestseller list of the New York Times. We are a fairly small academic publishing firm, but as long as I think there's a good scholarly reason for getting the book out and we know that it will find a home in some university libraries, we exist to put that research out there. And I think because we are quite a small firm and we fill that gap in terms of, some of what we publish is quite niche, but, it has to go somewhere.
So let's build on that. I've got a question, and the answer to this might shock some of our listeners. How many copies of books do you sell? So can I phrase it like, what's the highest number of copies that a book has sold that you've been in charge of? And what's the average, would you say? Because this is a really interesting question. My friends that aren't in academia, like the guys I went to school with, they'll say, oh, amazing, you published a book. That's amazing. You're on Amazon. I can find you on Amazon. But I always say, well, yeah, like nobody's bought that book. So that's not how it works. I'm not going to be in Waterstones. So like, how many copies are we talking about here?
It's fair to say our average first print run would be 175 to 200 books.
Okay, so the first
and
time
we regularly don't do a second print run.
Okay.
Sometimes we do a second print run, and that is really exciting.
Yeah.
Probably the book I've done that sold the best was we did this amazing 3-volume set last year on, it's called Bear and Human, and it was looking at relationships between bears and humans from the Paleolithic through to the early modern, and it was just brilliant, and it was just a really, really exciting book. It's a big 3-volume set, and it was just beautiful.
And it sold really well.
It sold really well.
Wow, yeah.
But yeah, sometimes certain things are harder to do. Sometimes, people will say, oh, I'd like to do an edition of a certain text.
Yeah.
And yes, there is a scholarly need, but it's a very small scholarly need. So again, it's a case of, it's what I was coming back to, where maybe we can work with the author and say, well, yes, you could do this critical edition, but could we contextualize it? Can we broaden it out so it's relevant for historians as well? Can we set it in a broader, sort of socio-political context to the text so that there's some sort of extra material there rather than just having a very slim critical edition of a quite niche text?
So the places that are buying these books, so in my head, from an academic's point of view, I will go to a conference, the Leeds conference I'm going to next week, the International Medieval Congress. There's a big hall where all you publishers are in there saying hello and being all smiley and selling your books to people, but also discussing ideas for books with authors in the corner, where hopefully you get a bit of privacy.
Absolutely.
Yep. Leave those publishers alone, everyone, if you see them in conversation. So academics will buy your books at conferences. What other places are you selling books to? It's libraries, right?
Yeah, I mean, our market is very much academic libraries. Yeah. So I think, that's pretty much the market that we're set up for. We hope that most of our books will end up on a university library shelf, or if not, the physical copy on the shelf, maybe as part of the ebook collection.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's sort of a very much an area that I think after COVID people really realised, ebooks are so useful.
My students, I don't think, pick up a book ever in their lives anymore. They just log into a book now.
Which is a bit sad, because I do love the smell of books. You know, when you open a new book and it has that lovely new book smell, and it's...
Sometimes I bump into students in the library and I just want to say to them, thank you for being in the library. But whatever. So that might surprise people who haven't published before, that the number of books that we're talking about is quite low. But there is a margin for you to make a profit there if you publish enough books, right?
Well, as I say, we try and cover our costs. Yeah. If we can cover our costs plus a few overheads so that, you know, our building still has a roof on, for example.
And your salaries and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I like to eat. It's good. So I like to know that I can pay the bills each month. But yeah, I think, as I say, it's not like we make vast profits. And if we have a good year and we've made some profit, then we do sort of plough it right back into the company to try and set up sort of new tools, new things that are working for the academic community.
So, like, from the point of view of the academic, that's really interesting to think about. People who, like, aren't used to publishing and that kind of thing might think, oh, that's quite a low number of copies and that kind of thing. But just get over it, guys, right? Nobody reads our stuff. The important thing is to publish it, so it goes on your CV.
Researchers read your stuff.
Right, researchers do. Niche researchers. But from my point of view as an academic, my advice to early career researchers is just to say, publish it. It doesn't matter if not that many people read it, because it's on your CV and that's what matters.
It's on your CV and some people are going to read it. Enough people are going to read it and cite it that you are still driving forward scholarship within your field.
That's such a positive way of seeing it. Right, so the last bit about this before we move on to publishing chat and that kind of thing. Have you ever had a conversation with someone who's thinking of getting into publishing, like a current PhD student, that kind of thing? If you did, like, what's your advice if someone's maybe doing a PhD or they're doing a postdoc and they're thinking maybe I'd quite like this kind of publishing world? What would be your tips that people can do to help themselves prepare for that kind of environment?
Yeah, I mean, it is something I get asked a lot. I mean, the main tip is when you're asking somebody, don't say to them, as one person once did, so you're a failed academic, and I think I'm probably going to fail as well, so how can I get your job?
No.
I was like, thank you.
Thank you. Give them all your worst advice.
But I think as well, people often think I think that because they've written, therefore they can publish, and that it's very easy, whereas I think it does require a different skill set as well. And yes, there is sort of a fluidity between people who start off from an academic background and go into publishing. I mean, a lot of people at Brepols, myself included, did a doctorate first before we went there, but it does require its own skill set. It's not as easy as just sort of, you know, checking that commas haven't been missed and so on. It's very much a case of familiarizing yourself with the market, sort of identifying where you could expand or set up a new book series. And I think you do have to have good organizational skills, because at any one moment, I mean, the other day I looked, and from proposal stage onward through to books going into, you know, books that have just been printed, I've got 215 books on my list. And you have to be so organised so that you know at any given time, okay, that book's at peer review, I need to chase up the peer reviewer on that date. Okay, this book, I'm getting the proofs back on this date, so therefore I need to I need to allocate time on this date so that I can turn the proofs around. And it's an awful lot of organisational skills that, in the nicest possible way, some in academia don't necessarily possess.
Oh, what do you mean? I mean, hopefully everyone listening to this has got one person in their brain that they're thinking of right now.
No, I think what I would say is, if you're looking to get into publishing, it's good to have editing experience.
Yep.
You have to be the sort of person who's willing to engage with a style sheet.
Yep.
If the thought of looking through the MHRA style sheet makes you turn cold, it's maybe not the job for you, because you're going to spend a lot of time thinking about style sheets. you've got to have sort of a sense of how to work with people. I think you've got to be quite a people person, to be honest. I think if you're incredibly grumpy and just don't like talking to people, then conferences are going to be a nightmare for you, because it would just be painful.
Because I know that you guys will write to authors and ask them to spend some time talking about the next stage of their ideas and what they might be publishing next. Also, like, people will write to you and say, can I meet you at this conference and discuss this idea for a book? And you've got to be really good at pretending to be interested in stuff.
I think I almost always am interested, because I find people intrinsically interesting. Well, I think that's what I was saying about conferences. I am a people person. I love talking to people. I mean, listen to me, I never shut up. I love talking to people. And so that's great. But I think you've got to be interested in people and their ideas to sort of enjoy the job as well. Yeah. And you've got to be the sort of person who can also work with somebody and say, not impose your own ideas on them, but sort of be able to say, well, look, yeah, you want to do it like this, but what do you think about if we did it in this way instead? Would that be a possibility?
Is that something that you were always good at, or have you worked on that since you've been doing the job?
I mean, I grew up in Crewe, so tax didn't come naturally.
Great.
No, I think I've got a better sense these days of what works. And when people are talking to me about a project, I have a much better sense these days, just from trial and error as well. I mean, I have produced books that have gone over budget. I have produced books where I think, oh, this is going to be brilliant, and then it just hasn't sold well for whatever reason. Yeah. Likewise, I've published books and I've thought, well, you know, we'll be lucky if we sell 40 copies of that one and it's actually done really well.
Yeah.
It's sometimes you just don't know.
How many years have you been doing it? I didn't ask you that earlier.
That's giving away my age. No, this will be my 10th year of Brepols in September. 10 years. Happy so birthday, it's I get a long service award.
You mentioned the style sheet. So just for listeners, if you've never heard of a style sheet, basically that's a short document that a publisher gives you to tell you how to do your referencing, right? And how to use your spelling conventions.
And how to format your bibliography, that sort of thing.
So that's really important. And like from an author's point of view, it can be incredibly confusing because every different journal that you might write for will have its own style sheet. So you have to learn a whole load of new stuff. But I've also edited journals, and from the editor's point of view, it's incredibly frustrating when people don't read it and pay attention to it. So
exactly that. It can be frustrating when you're spending a lot of time chasing up things just because, you know, you're missing page references for journal articles, and I'm sort of having to go through and Google all of these journal articles that the author might have had sitting next to them on the desk, but I've got to find them from scratch and filling in the page references and so on.
Sending sympathy. And so what if someone wants to get the kind of experience that you had in your PhD of helping to edit things? And so you were talking about how you did proofing and editing experience when you were in Bergen. Like, how can people get that kind of experience?
Yeah,
I mean, random.
I think some of it was luck, but I think we do get people. I mean, we work with quite a lot of copy editors.
Yep.
It's often worth sort of, you know, if it's something that you're interested in. I think there are certain journals, you know, where as a student, you know, they're always looking for student volunteers who can help with the journals, and that might be one way into it. In terms of publishers and paid work, I think we do work with a lot of copy editors, but generally we'd sort of hope there's a bit of experience under the belt before we'll let you loose on the books, because obviously it slows things down and costs a lot, you know. If we end up having to redo the work once we've paid you to do the work, it sort of costs a lot. But I would say, you know, if you can get any sort of experience from your department and getting involved in any kind of editing projects, the student journals. I mean, that's one thing actually that I did during my PhD as well. In the first year of my PhD, my department organised a colloquium every year, and then the proceedings from that were published in a journal, so I was involved in that as well. And that's the sort of thing where you can get sort of hands-on experience very early on. And I would say, you know, if there are any sort of publications affiliated with your department, do see if they're looking for student helpers, you know, where you can get some hands-on experience.
And also, like, draw on the networks that you may have already, right? So if you know academics who are more senior than you, and you know that they edit a journal or that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Like, it's just talking to people and building friendships and partnerships, isn't it?
Exactly that. I mean, again, my old department, Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic, actually does a journal with Brepols called Viking and Medieval Scandinavia.
Oh, did
And
you
I
set
think-
that up by any chance?
I didn't actually,
Amazing.
but I now manage it. No, it was actually established, I think, before I started my PhD. So it's been running a few years now. But I think that's something that's always had like a student who's sort of affiliated with it, who can work.
So that's really good. Some people listening to this podcast might be senior academics who are like looking to think about how they can engage early career researchers, and that's something definitely that I would. Anytime I've helped an early career researcher who's said like, "Oh, thank you so much for your help" and that kind of thing, I will always say, pass it on when you get higher up the ladder. You know, like
Absolutely.
when you're
Pay
in
it
that senior
forward.
position, exactly. Help someone whose stage is behind you. The reason why I'm doing this podcast is because people used to say to me when I was a PhD student, how do I do that? Like, I was finishing my PhD, and a first year PhD might say, how do I do this? And I'd explain it to them, and they go, oh, that's really good. You should like do more of this. So that's why I'm here. Pay it forward. Exactly. Pay it forward.
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky. I benefited hugely. You know, the fact that the Centre for Medieval Studies in Bergen kept me and my husband able to eat more than pasta for a year, you know, I was very, very grateful. And that's, again, you know, it's something where it's why I wanted to do the podcast, you know, it's paying it forwards. And if I can help people, and either in terms of putting together book proposals or on the next stage of the career ladder, then you know, I'm glad to be able to do that.
Yeah, we'll say that more at the end. But on that note, if you want to send a book proposal to Rosie, we'll give you her details as part of this podcast. So you're very welcome.
Oh, very nice, thank you.
You might get loads of flurry of obscure proposals.
That would be excellent. I love.
Well,
a
you've
good
already
obscure
got
proposal.
one from the guy in the hotel.
I do. That made me so happy.
Right, so we're just going to spend the rest of the podcast talking about actual publishing processes, and we've done it a bit already, but if you are an ECR and you're thinking about publishing and you want some advice on that kind of thing, then Rosie is here to like give out some advice, and we're going to do more of this after this podcast in our next podcast, but we'll talk about that at the end because it's quite exciting. And it's a special recording that we're going to do next week, but we won't say any more about that until the end because that makes you have to listen to the end of this podcast. So publishing, right? A monograph, a book, a whole book. What I'd like to know are like, what stages does one go through when publishing a book? Now, you could go into tons of detail on this, but we'll keep it kind of fairly simple. Like, let's say I've got an idea for a book and I corner you in the bar at a conference and say, Rosie, you have to listen to my idea. And I give you my idea for a book and it takes me half an hour to explain it. And you say, great, we'll work together. What are the stages that an author would go through to get it from that conversation in a conference to a finished book that I can hold in my hand?
Yeah, I mean, the starting point, I'm always going to come back to you and say, I need a volume proposal form. Mm-hmm. So the way most academic publishers work, and Brepols is no exception, is we tend to have lots and lots of different book series. And each book series, some of them are thematic, some of them are more chronological, some of them are quite broad. But the reason why we do this is because each editorial board, they're effectively our quality control. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I've got a background in Viking Age history and archaeology, but that doesn't mean that I can necessarily assess a book on 12th century manuscripts.
I can.
You can, but you know, me alone, it's not good enough. I can't give the feedback. So what happens is with all of the books that we take forward, we start off with a basic volume proposal form and we send that on to the editorial board. Now, most publishers have got their own variation of this proposal form, so it's always worth having a look on the website, and it's one way of knowing if people are sending out a proposal to lots of different people because they don't necessarily take the time to fill in your form. And that's a point I'll come back to. So we send it on to the editorial board, and the idea is that you can get quite a few comments and feedback from them because they are your peers in the field. They can have a look at it and they might say, well, yes, it's really interesting that you're mentioning this in this chapter, but then we don't understand why this is in this chapter. Wouldn't it make more sense to combine these two and have a separate chapter on this? And you might think, no, I've done it like that for a reason, and I can explain that to you. And you might think, oh, yes, that's a really good point, actually. And a lot of the reason why we work like this is because the editorial board, it is supposed to be supportive. They are on your side. They want to help you make the best book possible, and they want to help make the peer review process as smooth as possible. Yeah. So if they're flagging something up now, it's because probably if they don't say it now, the peer reviewer is going to say it later, and you're going to have more problems later on. So the idea is they'll go through the volume proposal form, but assuming all looks good, usually for a monograph, we will either, I mean, it sort of depends on the editorial board. Very often we'll then invite in a sample chapter.
Yep.
We'll send on that sample chapter to an external reader, get comments back, and if all looks good, we can contract the volume at that point.
Okay.
For edited collections, it's more often we just tend to wait and say, okay, we just want the full manuscript in.
So that's a collection of essays written by several different people that has a couple or a few editors.
Exactly.
So it's like a multi-author volume.
Yeah, because of course you can't tell from one good chapter if the whole book's going to be good or not. Terrible. So it tends to be that we'll sort of just wait and ask for the full manuscript in. But either way, ultimately, the whole book is going to get read by your peer reviewers. So these are external readers who are experts in the field, and we're going to ask them to read through the manuscript and comment on it, and they'll give us a sense of, is this good, is this bad? We ask them for recommendations, can we take this forwards, or does it need major rewriting, or is it just an absolute no-go? I will say it's very rare that books can't be salvaged. Sometimes we get things where it's like, well, yes, this book could be really interesting, but really this chapter needs rewriting and this chapter needs rewriting, and then would recommend a re-review. That's fine, but we're very much sort of dependent on the peer reviewers for that.
Yeah, that's happened to me. I've had that experience where you've had to do a slightly different proposal, slightly different sample chapters and that kind of thing. And if that happens to you as an author, it can be quite kind of frustrating. But my attitude to that kind of feedback is that if you go away from it for a while and digest it and calm down and don't take it personally, often you get a better book and a better idea for a book, a more coherent, stronger argument, and that person has really, really helped you. Yeah. Even if initially you'd react defensively to that.
Exactly
kind of
that. I think most of the time when peer reviewers say something, there's a good reason behind it. And again, I think it's better that a peer reviewer flags it up and gives you time to correct it than that your book goes out into the world, gets published, and then gets sort of destroyed in reviews that are published about the book.
Yeah.
You'd far rather have somebody flag it up and say, you know what, this needs sorting now, while you're still in a position to do something about it.
So after you've got the peer review, then you might issue a contract to the author.
Yeah, we'd usually issue the contract at that point.
That has like a deadline on it, right?
It has a deadline on it. Now, I will say, I think, was it Douglas Adams who said he liked deadlines? He liked the whooshing noise they make as they go past. And I think of that line often because I think people very rarely meet their deadlines. Now, I think, again, different publishers are sort of more or less inflexible on this. Obviously, if we've sorted out a deadline, it's because we're sort of planning for that book that year. But I tend to take the view that if you need a bit longer, that's absolutely fine. I just want to know.
Yeah, I've heard this from other publishers, right?
I just want to know.
Tell them, communicate.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Because sometimes things just go quiet and you don't know, is the author still working on the book? Has the book project been dropped? Yeah. So as long as I know and I can plan and I can update things in my big spreadsheet, I just need to know what's happening when.
Publishers are people, right? They know that stuff happens in your life, right? They're not going to berate you.
And frankly, I would always rather you took an extra 6 months to get the manuscript into the shape you wanted it than to rush to meet an arbitrary deadline and then have more corrections to do after peer review. Yeah. This is your book. It's got to be something that you're proud of. It's got to be something you're happy about. So if you need 6 months more, that's absolutely fine. So, if you say, oh, I'm going to submit this in August 2026, and you get to June 2026, and you're like, no, not happening, that's fine. I just ask that you drop me an email going, actually, we're now sort of talking more like December 2026. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say no.
So good. Noted. So we get to the stage where someone has written their whole book and they send it to you what are the next stages from there?
Yeah, I mean, by this point, obviously, we're hoping it's under contract. So, and one thing I actually meant to come back and say with regard to the proposal was, once we're onto the peer review stage, we would very much expect you to only be in talks with one publisher.
Yeah, that's really important, yeah.
What we have had cases where we've sent out a book for peer review, and then a different publisher's asked somebody on one of my editorial boards if they can peer review the same book. And it's just like, okay, what's going on here?
So would you automatically withdraw that offer, or would you just really discipline the author?
At this point, we went back to the author and we said, well, look, before we pay our peer reviewers start to invest in this, are you committed to us? And he said, well, I'm not sure. So we said, well,
we're not going to pay for peer review.
On this occasion, the other press has already sent out the book for peer review and we haven't yet, so we shall withdraw.
Okay.
It's
So let's assume that they are not cheating on you and that they're being faithful. They send you their whole book from, like, I don't know, however many 100,000 words it is. Then what's next? I'm trying to think in my brain. That
it's gone through peer review. It's gone through. You've had a chance to make your corrections, and then very often what we do at Brepols is we run this system called shepherding, which is kind of a really twee name but a nice idea, which is the idea, again, it's sort of working with our editorial board. The idea is that whoever on the editorial board's got research interests closest to your subject is then going to do last checks on the manuscript. And the idea as well is that they're sort of your point of contact, and if you're not sure about something while you're doing the corrections, and maybe peer reviewer 2's been nasty, because it's always reviewer 2 who's nasty, and they've said something
usually is
or maybe they've said something and you don't agree with it. The idea is that you can go to your shepherd and say, well, look, what do you think about this? And then you're sort of getting that peer-to-peer support again about how to engage with it. And the idea is that they'll also do the last checks on the manuscript and say, yes, these peer review comments have all been engaged with. I'm very happy with this. Green light, good to go. And so up to this point, I'm working really, really closely with the editorial board. But once the book goes into production, that's the point where we step in as a press and we take over. And then we're sort of putting it into production and taking it all the way through. So we do a lot of hands-on work on the manuscript. We always start off with basic sort of gatekeeping checks. Is everything there? Has it got a bibliography? Or all the images of a decent quality, or are they just like 3 pixels on a page? So the idea is that we're sort of flagging up again any problems at this point, so that if we need to go back to the author and say, figure 2.3 is not usable, can you try and source a replacement? That sort of things while they've got time. Then we run a whole lot of macros on the manuscript, little things that nobody would notice until it's gone wrong. So things like adding a non-breaking space after circa, or making sure that you've got end dashes in your page.
I always do that when I'm writing.
I love an end dash. I love a good end dash. But, making sure that things are all given in a consistent way, that if you've got half of your quotes in double quote marks and half in single quote marks, we harmonise them, just little things like that. And we apply a template at this point. So if you ever work with Brepols, at some point you're going to get proofs back from us with italics highlighted green and bold highlighted, I can't remember what colour. But the idea is that we're fixing certain styles so that later on when we come to do the typesetting and we put it into InDesign, we don't lose all the styles. Generally speaking, we'll then send it on for a copy edit, so somebody's going to be doing a line-by-line read-through, and they're commenting, and, it might be, oh, you spelt this place name like this in this chapter, but it's like this in this chapter, which should it be? And you'll be like, oh, or picking out some typos and so on. Is this the place to say? I got a message from a copy editor the other day saying, I earn my money. And it was a volume on the Punic Wars, and there was a very crucial typo.
Oh, wow. The Punic Wars. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. Suffice to say, there was a very crucial typo, and she just sent me a message saying, I earn my money. And I was like, yes, you do. For which we are all grateful. But this is why a copy editor is so important. And generally speaking, the idea is that we try and work really intensively on the word proofs, because we're trying to get the text as perfect as possible, so that then when we start to do the layout, we don't have to start making really expensive corrections to the text in InDesign, because that's the point where your costs start spiraling. So we're always really sort of quite clear on that. When we send out the copy edited proofs. It's like, this is your last chance to make substantive changes to the text. And the reason for that is because once we've done the layout in InDesign, it suddenly becomes so expensive to start making changes. Because if an author suddenly says, oh, I missed out this paragraph, we might then have to retypeset all of the following pages in that chapter, and it starts to become really messy and complicated. So one of the reasons why we spend so much time on the copy editing is to try and get the text perfect, so that then when we're onto the layout stage, we can just be like, yes, I want that image there, or can you make this image a little bit bigger? There's always going to be some things that you've missed or that you want to change, but the idea is these should be just a few small changes. So obviously you get your types, you get a chance to check proofs at each stage. So you get a chance to check the copy edited proofs, and you get a chance to check the typeset proofs.
And don't take ages over this, people, right? If this is you writing this book, don't leave it for 6 months.
No, because
you're delaying
by this point, we have announced it on our website. And we've said this is going to be out in March. So that's the point where I do start to get stressed about deadlines. I'm like, okay, we need this out for this date, which means we need to get it to the printer on this date. So I'm going to give you 3 weeks to check this. Is that okay? Yes. And then if your 3 weeks come and go, I start to email you. Is there any chance we can have the proofs back, please? Really, really need the proofs back now, please. So obviously you get a chance to comment on the proofs at each stage. And if you want to do an index, once you've got the typeset proofs, that's a good stage. One thing I didn't say, one of the first things we do when we're doing all these gatekeeping checks as well is we do a cover design at that point.
Cool.
Because that's quite important for us. It's a really important marketing tool. So we do a forthcoming titles catalogue. Like twice a year, so you'll have like titles recently published or forthcoming between say August and February.
I'd say also from the author's point of view, if your book has a cover,
it feels real.
And like there's pressure to do, you've got to get this done now. It exists. It's got a cover.
Exactly. But to me, it's also a really exciting thing as well, because it's like the book is now tangible. It's going to happen. It's like, look at the cover. It's a pretty cover. You've finalised the blurb. You've finalised the title. It's happening. And it's suddenly the first time you start to think, this is going to be a real book, real. It's actually happening. And so the cover is quite an important moment. And I particularly love it when you set up a new book series and you start to produce the first series designs. And it's like, what colour scheme shall we do for this? What background shall we have? And it's really exciting.
I love the cover of my first monograph. It came out 4 years ago and I still look at it and love it. So it's like one of my children, I still look at them and love them just about. Just about. So where did we get to? Copy editing, and then you're basically into marketing, right? After that.
So basically once the book goes to print, we're on to the marketing side of things. So as I say, we do the cover a bit in advance. We'll do a lot of the marketing in advance of the book coming out, which is, again, a reason why it's really essential that when we've said it's going to be out in March, we try and work together to get this book out in March. So, some of it is sort of in advance. It'll appear in mailing lists, it'll appear in forthcoming titles catalogues, it'll appear in material that we send on to libraries and library consortia. We like to make sure that we've got key books for certain conferences. As I say, sometimes when I'm working with authors, I'll say, well, look, let's aim for this conference, and then we can have it on the table at this conference, and that's the time to get the book out.
And then the author can have their photograph with the book.
Exactly.
For marketing purposes.
I do love a good author photograph at a conference. It's like, look, they've got their book.
So I had a book launch with a couple of other authors when my book came out, and someone made cakes that had the covers of our books on the
amazing.
Cake. There were 3 cakes, and my cake for my book was the only one that anyone ate. So clearly mine was the best book out of those 3. But that was so cool. I've got the picture somewhere. Anyone follows me on Twitter or X, you can probably find it somewhere on my profile. But there's a picture of me holding up a copy of my book with this cake in front of me.
Oh, that's fantastic. Because my other obsession in life is cake
Cakes?
decorating. I love a bit of cake decorating. I like to spend my evenings faffing around and making flowers out of sugar. So I'm cool like that.
So basically then we're done, right?
Basically, I mean, it all sounds terribly, terribly easy. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, we'll work with you if you want to do a book launch or something. We can come up with special marketing campaigns. We always do worldwide distribution. So, your book's going to be on, it's going to be on bookstores in the US. It'll be at the Medieval Academy. It'll be at Kalamazoo. It'll be,
Yeah.
We'll have it on display in
Kalamazoo
Australia.
International Congress on Medieval Studies, if you're wondering why we just mentioned Kalamazoo.
Yeah.
Big deal, that.
It is a big deal. But, we make sure that your book will reach audiences around the world.
And that's worth bearing in mind when you're getting in touch with a press and choosing a press and that kind of thing, is thinking about reach and marketing and all that kind of thing. If you want to ask publishers awkward questions about that, then feel free. From the first contact with you to holding the book in your hand, generally what kind of time scale are we talking about? And I know it varies. How long's a piece of string?
That was exactly what I was going to say. How long's your piece of string?
So I was going to say, what's the quickest anyone's ever done it for you?
Oh, the quickest I've ever turned a book round was for an edited collection, actually.
Uh-huh.
And I had to turn it round. I mean, it had already been peer reviewed.
Okay.
No, it hadn't been peer reviewed, and we had to do a really expedited peer review. And we got that out in 6 months. But it was...
So that book already existed, really, didn't it?
Basically, they came to us and said, do you want to do this book?
Yeah.
It needs to be out by this date because we've got funding to make it open access, but if it's not published by this date, we can't do it. I moved heaven and earth to do that, and I did a lot of the copy editing myself in my evenings because we didn't have. So I worked evenings and weekends to get that one out. Please don't do that to me again.
Disclaimer: I'm doing an edited collection with Rosie's Press. It will not be done in 6 months. Just so
no, that was. I mean, I think more usual is. So, just as an example, I mean, again, with my academic hat on, I published a Festschrift last year with 2 other people in honour of somebody's 65th birthday. So this obviously came out in 2023 for their birthday. Now, the idea behind the book had actually come up I suggested it during lockdown, during COVID lockdown. So I have a very vivid memory of sort of contacting somebody during lockdown and saying, this might be an insane idea, but what do you think about editing a book with me? So all told, it took us 3 years from that initial idea through to getting contributors on board, having them write their papers, getting through peer review, through to getting the book out.
Some of the listeners may have heard me rant about this before, but I'm doing something like this at the moment, and it's taken way longer than that, but we won't mention it.
I think as an editor, it is a bit like herding cats.
What's
sometimes.
the longest you've ever taken to act, and you haven't withdrawn it? Like, what's the longest it's ever actually completed?
I mean, I should start off by saying the average, of course, one can never know how long it's going to take to get the book in.
Yeah,
we're reliant with the authors.
This,
but what I was going to say was usually we'd look at sort of 3 to 4 months for peer review.
Yeah.
Although sometimes it can take 3 to 4 months to find a peer reviewer.
Yeah.
That's its own separate story. And usually from the moment we get the final manuscript through to the moment it goes to print, we're sort of talking 9 to 10 months.
Yeah.
Now, I do believe there is a book on our list that was sort of has been there since 1998. I don't think it's going to happen. That hasn't been finished. Obviously, this has nothing to do with me.
Some people listening might not have been born in 1998.
I certainly hadn't heard of Brepols in 1998, now, whether or not...
They would have been a cool indie band from somewhere in England then.
But... I'd say usually after a certain point, we do sort of follow up on books. If nothing's happening, we'll just send an email saying, is this still the plan?
Hopefully that's not going to happen.
Sometimes you see, occasionally you do have people that have submitted a proposal, but of course nothing's contracted. We've never received any sample text.
Yeah.
You send a follow-up saying, are you still interested? And they said, no, I've changed my mind. And then you see the book's published by somebody else 2 weeks later. It's like, all right.
All right.
You win some, you lose some. And I think all publishers will have that experience. Yeah.
That is so interesting to hear this from the other side of things. It's great. I only really think about these things from the author's point of view, but,
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I try and stay in research as well, because I think it keeps me in touch with the field, but it also means I can share the author's pain, when I'm overdue with my own academic text that I've promised. It's like I would be a complete hypocrite if I would then turn around and say, how dare you miss your deadlines, because I miss my own deadlines as an academic. And it also means, I know what the style guide's like because I have to use it myself, because I've just edited a book and I had to go through and tidy up all my contributors.
I used to be really good at that before I became really busy with other stuff. Like, I had a really good eye for that. The first edited volume I did, 2016. My copy editing on other people's chapters was amazing, but now the more I do,
I think I've just trained. I can spot a missed comma at 20 paces these days. It's terrible.
I'm scared to email you again.
No, it's absolutely terrible. It's like when you go out for a coffee and you suddenly see a shower of misplaced apostrophes on the menu, and I'm like, I must not correct the menu.
So let's kind of draw towards a close. So we've got a couple of other things to mention. I would like to ask you, are there any common mistakes that early career authors will make, or areas where you tend to need to help early authors more than more experienced authors in the publication process?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one that comes up again and again is how to turn a PhD thesis into a monograph. Yeah. And I think that one comes up so often just because, as well, I think there's a lot of pressure out there, but there's also this assumption that of course your first publication is going to be your PhD thesis turned into a monograph, and I think that's often not realistic. Not all PhD theses lend themselves to books. And I think there's sometimes too much pressure, and because they are different things written for different audiences. And I've heard of people trying to sort of avoid having to do too much work by effectively writing the PhD thesis as a monograph, but then it's not doing what a PhD thesis should, and they're not like passing their Viva, for example, because it's not hitting certain points.
Oh, so many of our listeners are probably panicking right now.
Exactly.
When you say
so
that.
I think the thing is, a PhD thesis and a monograph, they are different beasts, and you have to treat them separately. But I also think you shouldn't put yourself under too much pressure and think, oh, but this must become the book.
Yeah, mine didn't. I changed mine completely. I think I've said this before on the podcast, but my PhD was 3 case studies that I was interested in, and the book was one of those case studies, really, really expanded into a book-led project.
I think that's the thing. After you've done your Viva, you finish your PhD. I mean, I think there's 2 things here. One is that when you write your PhD, you pretty much know who you're writing for as well. And you know it's going to be read, but it's going to be read by a very small number of people. But a book needs to be so much more. It needs to be bigger. It's got to go out into the world, and it's got to be read by quite a few people. So I think it's a case of maybe when you look at your PhD, you need to think, okay, well, maybe that chapter's my strongest. What would happen if I stripped away the other chapters, and as you did, and just made that the core of something completely new? Does it necessarily need to be a book? Can you just turn yours into book chapters? I got journal articles and some book chapters out of my PhD.
And some people argue that journal articles are better than a monograph anyway, because you can make more of them for just as much effort. And if you're thinking in the UK market, we're thinking about ref and all the different ways that you measure research. Like the advice I would give there from my point of view as an academic would be, talk to your mentors and talk to your advisors and stuff,
because they will have a much better idea. And I think as well, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but my entire PhD was basically written in the subjunctive, because I didn't want to nail my colours to the mast. And one could possibly perhaps argue that maybe this might have been the case, because it was that thing where you're constantly looking over your shoulder because you think you're going to get called out. But by the time you're writing a book, you are the expert in the field. You've passed your Viva, you've got a doctorate in this, you are the expert in the field. So you've sort of got to own your arguments and go into it and say, this is how it is, and I'm arguing it based on X, Y, Z.
Pressure.
And I think the other thing is as well, you've sort of got to lose that review of scholarship. Maybe you don't need to give every exhaustive case study of something ever. Just pick out a few best case studies and build them into an overarching argument.
Yeah, because a book's meant to be fun to read. Even if it's an academic book, it's still got to be fun to read.
It's got to have a sort of overarching narrative. You've got to be able to take your reader by the hand and say, here is how my argument unfolds. Allow me to lead you through it in a sensible way.
When I teach really, really good students at my university, the ones that are getting the highest marks that I might give, my last advice to them when they've nailed everything is give me a narrative, give me a story, walk me through a story in your essay. And if you can do that, you can do anything in
Yeah.
academia. And
I mean, I think
yeah,
that's
pressure.
people get very stressed about PhDs, which I completely understand. I mean, but I think probably one of the best bits of advice I got during my PhD was a PhD is a passport. It's got to get you over the border, right? It's going to get you to the land of doctorate. If it's coffee stained and raggedy round the edges, nobody cares because once you're there, it's done. You're in. You've got the
Yeah.
stamp. And a book is where you can sort of polish up your ideas. It's where you can pursue the things that maybe interested you a bit more. You can maybe, I don't know, I had to jettison masses for my PhD because I just ran out of words because I had such a tight word count. But you can start to bring in more information that's interesting. You can lose some bits that you put in because you wanted to satisfy your external examiner, you know.
Someone I know had to basically change their whole central argument to satisfy their external examiner. And the examiner said, I won't pass you until you've done this. And the guy was like, well, I don't really agree with it, but I'm going to do it because I want my doctorate.
Exactly, you just want to get it
But in
done.
the book, you can write what you want. As long as
Exactly.
your examiner isn't your
As long
anonymous
as your
peer
examiner
reviewer.
isn't one of your peer reviewers. But, you know, I think the book is where you get the chance to really present your PhD in a far more polished way.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, make sort of connections, draw it out. Because I also always say to people, you know, you're not dumbing it down, but you do need to explain certain key things. Imagine that your book's going to be picked up by a first-year undergraduate.
Yeah, yeah.
Or by somebody who's in a related discipline, but is interested in the theme, but is not necessarily as au fait with the background. I mean, as a publisher, I know as an undergraduate, one of my bugbears was people would just cite a load of Latin and not translate it. Because, of course, everybody read Latin. Except I didn't read Latin, and I was like, great, there's just a load of Latin in this
I hate
thing,
this
and I don't
too,
want...
yeah.
So, you know, it's about making the work accessible. So one of the things one of the things that Brepols always asks for is, you know, when you're quoting a primary source, give the original, because those who want to can read the original, but give a translation as well.
I deal with early medieval sources sometimes, and I sort of get the gist of early medieval English, but I wouldn't say I can read it. Anyway, the advice on dissertation to book, that's relevant. We're going to kind of wrap up things. Might ask you a couple more questions, but basically, that's really good advice because next week we are meeting again, aren't we, to do more stuff? We are. So we are going to the International Medieval Congress at the University of Leeds next week, and myself and Rosie are in a session with our favourite podcasters, Rachael and Olivia, and also Lara, who joined us for the podcast episode on having children in academia. And we're all going to do an actual session at this conference for an audience, as if it's a normal conference session. But we're going to record it and turn it into a live podcast episode at the end of next week. So the theme for the session is called From Dissertation to Book, Publishing Your First Academic Monograph. Is that right?
That's right.
I think it's right.
That sounds right.
Yeah, it's basically on publishing your first academic monograph. And we've got Rosie on as a publisher. We've got me, who's written a monograph. Lara is an experienced academic who's written a couple of books now, so she'll be giving the kind of long-term perspective. Rachael is currently writing a monograph. Literally as we speak, she's doing it today, I think, because I messaged her earlier.
Excellent.
And Olivia is finishing a PhD and hoping maybe one day to write it. So lots of different perspectives. There's also going to be Q&A from the audience members who might ask any kind of random stuff.
Who knows?
Who knows? They'll probably be asking Rosie for like desperate answers to questions that can't be answered. Help me, you're a publisher. So look out for that episode. That's going to be the episode after this one. So we'll announce it on social media and we'll put it in the usual places once we've got home from the conference. And hopefully that's going to be really fun, I think, because we've not done that before. It could work. It could go horribly wrong. Who knows?
It's worth a try. And I think it'll be really nice to have all those different perspectives coming as well.
Definitely from the audience, yeah.
Yeah.
And so Rosie's going to join us for that. We also have a couple of ideas from Rachael and Olivia for future topics to talk about with Rosie, because we can do this from anywhere in the world via the magic of the internet. So when Rosie goes back to France where she lives, we can do this from afar. Olivia wants to do something on how to edit a volume of essays, because that's
brilliant.
something she's going to be doing.
And that comes up a lot, so
So,
very happy to talk
yeah,
about that.
and we'll talk about other publishing topics as well. So hopefully Rosie's going to join us on a fairly regular basis when our schedules work, and we can get all those stuff joined in. So I think that's the end for us about the alternative career paths and publishing advice. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you really wanted to mention that we haven't got in? It's putting you on the spot now.
No, and I'm trying to think. I think I've covered most of the topics that come up quite often. One of the topics that I often get asked is about choosing a publisher, so that's something I can pontificate on briefly. But
Why choose mine?
no, I'm going to be very good and not just promote Brepols here, although obviously I'd love to have you at Brepols. But no, one of the things I would say is, you're probably most au fait with who's the best in your particular field.
Yeah, because you look at your bibliography,
when you're
right?
writing your bibliography, you know which names come up over and over and over again.
Totally.
So the only things I would say with regards to choosing a publisher are, it's always worth asking around, talk to your PhD supervisor or, the people in your department, see who they recommend. Do chat to people at conferences. Do a bit of research online. There's a Norwegian, the Norwegian rankings for publishers.
I didn't know about this.
There is a ranking in Norway, and I cannot remember the website off the top of my head.
I'll try and find it.
But
keep talking.
basically, it ranks publishers 0, 1, or 2. And if your publisher is ranked level 2, then they're considered to be a high-end publisher who always, obviously, peer reviews. Brepols is a level 2 publisher, naturally. The other things I would say is, don't worry too much if people email you before conferences. That's what I was saying earlier. I often email people before conferences and set up meetings and so on. Fair enough. If you don't think now's the time, there's obviously no obligation, but
Yeah, I've been doing that this week. People have been emailing me
never
and saying,
hurts
do
to
you
have
want
a
to meet
chat.
in Leeds? And I will often say, I haven't got anything for you right now, but I'll bear you in mind in future. Or like I've chatted with Rosie at that conference a few years ago and said, not sure what I'm going to do with this. We'll see where it goes, and nothing came of it. But we met and we talked to each other, and now we have got ideas. We know to talk to each other. Right?
Exactly. And the only other thing I'll say is, do beware of predatory publishers. If somebody emails you and says, if you give me £500, we will publish this,
I've never had to pay to publish.
Exactly. I was going to say, a good quality publisher, they're just saying to you, can we have a chat? If the first thing they're doing is asking for money, that's the time to be worried. But, always, if you're unsure, have a bit of a Google. You'll always find the answers online, and ask around, and you'll get a sense of who's got a good reputation and who hasn't.
So just to let you know, I didn't find the Norwegian rankings, but we'll put it in the podcast description when we put this out, so we'll find it later on, don't worry.
Fair enough.
Great. It's been lovely to have you, Rosie. I hope you've enjoyed telling everyone
been a pleasure.
about your job. It's been really good fun, and this is the first podcast I've ever done with someone actually in the same room.
It's exciting.
Usually on Zoom. I know we've got microphones and a computer and everything. It's all very professional.
Very high tech.
It is. So we'll try and do this again, I think. I'll get Olivia and Rachael to try and come to Norwich and do this, I think, because this is a fun way to do it. So please leave your feedback with us on our social media. If you enjoyed listening to this, or if you think we can improve it in any ways, please do get in touch. You can contact us on Twitter at ECR Podcasters, or on Blue Sky at ECR Podcasters. You can email us ecrpodcasters@gmail.com, or you can leave us reviews on our Spotify and get in touch with us in other ways there. I've really enjoyed looking at where people are listening to this podcast from different places in the world, because we're getting almost all of the continents now.
Excellent.
I think we got South America last time around. Someone in Brazil's been listening to us. If that's you, hello, thank you, obrigado, thank you very much for listening to us in Brazil. And yeah, spread the word, tell your friends, and we'll look forward to hearing more from our listeners as you get in touch with us. I will put Rosie's details in the podcast description, but if you want to follow her on Twitter or X, she's at Rosie Bonté. And there's also a lovely link to her publisher Brepols, which we'll put in there as well. So you can just search Brepols, it's Brepols. Just Google them and you'll find them.
Fantastic.
So we've been the Early Career Researcher podcast. I've been Charlie. It's goodbye from me, and we've had Rosie on the show. Goodbye, Rosie.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much for listening to us, guys. Hopefully you'll follow us and keep tabs on our live broadcast from next week. We won't be broadcasting it live. We'll be recording it live and uploading it later that week. So don't think that you can live tweet us and we'll reply. Maybe one day, but not quite yet. Thank you very much for listening to us. We look forward to seeing you again. We've been the Early Career Researcher podcast. Thank you and goodbye.